Howdy ho, good campers. Well, just a little while ago, maybe 6 months ago, I started noticing the back of the truck, and I'd be looking at it and I think, is that sagging on the right hand side? And I didn't think much of it. It sort of rode nice. It didn't seem to have any problems or issues. I mean, you know when there's an issue driving your vehicle. But the more, because it was on my brain, then I thought about it some more and I kept looking at it probably a bit more closer. I took it into the four-wheel drive shop. I said, what do you guys think? They said, well, the bushings are gone. They think they were the cheap and nasty leaf springs. So I thought, you know, the hell with it. I'm just going to get some new leaf springs. There are 300 constants because now all of this is on the back of the tray. There used to be nothing on there. I'm not going to go in exactly how I replace the leaf springs. It's the first time I've ever done anything like this. You know the saying, if I can do it, anybody can do it. You got to have some tools, I guess. But all I've done so far, and this is basically from watching other videos and watching guys do it, I've chalked the front tire so it can't roll. I've put it in four-wheel drive low so it actually locks the wheels and not free spinning. I've jacked up as far as it can go, and as you can see down there, on both sides of the frame, I've got it blocked up. I've let it back down just to where these are hanging free now. We're going to do one side at a time, again, because that's what they say in the videos. I'm going to do this side, and let's take this tire off and see what's behind it. Okay, that leaf spring is out, and it wasn't as well, it didn't take as long as I thought it was going to take, and it was a little easier than I thought. The worst part was getting these nuts off the U-bolts, and I think maybe they used Loctite or something like that. I had to actually get a bar, a piece of pipe on my little, I had to get a piece of pipe on that to give myself a little bit more fulcrum. So, but that worked, and everything's off. I'm going to clean all this up. Particularly here where I know where there's a bit of rust. I'm going to repaint all of that. All this where this is going to be cleaned up. I'm going to repaint that, and where it sits, everything behind here is going to be fixed up. Everything here, I'm going to treat all this rust and paint that. I'm then going to go through with sandpaper, wire brush, and steel wool, and get rid of a lot of the I guess you could call it surface rust, but really it's just to take off a little bit here and there. Up here there's not much to do, but I'll give that a sand. And back in here I'll also sand that. I'll sand this down as good as I can. Then everything's going to get treated with rust, with a rust converter. Once that's dry, I will use a primer. Once the primer is, and I'll use a quick dry, and then I'll finish it off with 2 coats of epoxy enamel. I'm kind of hoping that you can see that with the sun barreling in here. I've painted it all up, and I put on some rust converter. This is the one that I've used, but only because I couldn't find mine, and a neighbor had some of this. This is sort of the kind of the stuff we used to use, oh gosh, at least 3 decades ago in the paint trade when we were fighting rust. This you kind of splash it on. You got to be a little bit more careful with this one. This one's probably more dangerous. This one can probably do some skin damage, so just be really careful if you're using stuff like this. But the thing is, it looks like water, you just splash it on kind of like water, being careful of course, and it converts the rust. It takes a bit longer. So I'm going to let this dry overnight. I wanted to get it undercoated tonight, but it's just not going to happen. Now you might be thinking, why didn't you also take off the other side, Rick, and do all this at the same time? And it probably can be done, especially with people that are experts at this sort of thing. But because I'm no expert, and this is the very first time I've done this, I'm leaving that side on so that when I actually finish this side, it's already going to go exactly back in where it's supposed to go. Does that make sense? And then I will tackle the other side. So this is the new bushing. Now, to my understanding, this metal bit, it actually gets compressed between these two flanges, so it doesn't move. As far as, again, to my understanding, the bit that actually does all the work and needs to be greased is the outside of this and the inside of the bushings in there. And that's why they got all the grooves. Okay, admittedly the whole process was a bit of a battle, trying to figure things out, because this isn't my game. My wife said, maybe you should have just got the professionals to do it. And my answer to that was, working on your own vehicle, you learn so much about your vehicle, which I think comes in real handy, especially for in the future. If something does go wrong, you might even have a hint to know what is wrong. One of the biggest hassles I had, this hole in the flange didn't line up with that cylinder that it goes through to hold the actual leaf spring in place. And I'm, scratching your head. What am I going to do? Anyway, the whole thing had to come back, like 6, 7, 8 millimeters. You could just see the hole. You could see the cylinder. And this clamp came in real handy. I thought, fantastic. So I got it in most of the way, but then it wouldn't go through the other side. So I had to crawl underneath there, which makes me very uncomfortable. Even though I got all that stuff underneath there, I don't like crawling underneath this sort of stuff. Anyway, so the same thing is that I got in there. I looked back up in here. You could see it wasn't quite lining up, and it had to come back further again. This again came in super handy. So that took care of that. So anyway, the only thing I have left to do, the U-bolts are super tight. These are just snug on the shackles in here. And this is what I learned on YouTube, is put the tire on, lower the whole thing down to where it's supposed to sit, and then you crank them suckers up to, I think, 80 foot-pounds or something like that. So that's it. This side is done. How good does that look? I've just got the other side off, and from what I've been seeing and what I know now about leaf springs and replacement, I know now I've made a really, really good decision to replace all this stuff and replace it with new. Have a look at this. I don't know if you can see that. Can you? It's absolutely stripped. The shackle, and it's supposed to be that, a bit of grease there. But look at this side. It's just nothing but rust, and it's expanded because the rust is so bad. It is now basically brand new. I did also treat the surface rust and all that. For those of you that want some idea of how to treat surface, or how I did it, you've got to take off as much rust as you possibly can. The more the better. Then you've got to convert that rust using a rust converter. Now I started with this stuff here. I would never use it again. It sort of leaves it does the job. It changes the rust, but it leaves sort of an oily film on there. So I had to wipe it off. Oh, gee, what a job that was. So never again. And I know what I'm talking about. I've done this 1,000 times over. I was a painting contractor by trade. I've done so many rust jobs. This is a much better product, and I'm not affiliated. It works, and it's a lot easier. Dries faster. I then use a steel primer, and then I use an epoxy enamel rather than just a normal enamel. Epoxy enamel, it dries harder, it dries faster. You watch other videos and other people use different things. That's just the way I've done it. You do it the way you think you should do it. But that's how I've done it. I'm very happy with the way it's turned out. You can see some of this stuff, the old stuff where it's supposed to have grease on there. They were just so bad. Look at that. There's no grease on that. Now, part of that is my fault. I've had this truck now for, I think, about 3 years, and I've never greased them. Mind you, I think I've only put about 20,000 kilometers in the 3 years, so there's no excuse. But I would have found out then that these were probably no good. And these, they didn't look like they were in too bad a shape, but you saw this one, just to get the bolt off, so it stripped it, double threaded it now. So I'm thinking that maybe they tightened all these little nuts with maybe one of those rattle guns. The whole, anyway, the job is done. Everything's brand new down there, and I'm happy. Okay, one last thing. I forgot to get the cartridge. Okay, job done. Basically new leaf springs, bushings, all kinds of things. There was a couple of things that aren't new, and it's only because they turned out to be okay, which is the little, all those hard rubber things that bounces really hard against it, and the two pins or the two nuts in the front, and they turned out to be okay. If they weren't okay, I would have replaced them, but it just means I would have waited a bit longer before I tackled that job. I could say that, if I can do it, anybody can, but you're going to need some tools, and you're going to need a little bit of figuring out ways of figuring things out. I had a bit of a battle because, again, I've never done this before in my life. So, but it wasn't too difficult. And even though I said it takes 3 days, it took me 3 days. It wasn't like 3 8-hour days. A lot of it was waiting for, like, when I was painting. A lot of it when I was doing the painting, there's converting the rust, that's got to dry. There's the primer, that's got to dry. So all this has to dry. That's part of it. And my way of thinking, because I'm in there and then all this surface rust, why not fix it up? That's how I think. Anyway, it looks brand new down there now, and I'm one happy chappy.